Have you ever found yourself staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering, why does this hurt so much? Not the big fights, not the obvious betrayals, but the quiet moments when you realize your heart is aching over something you can't even name? Maybe it's the way he sighed when you asked for help, or how your effort feels invisible, or the sinking feeling that your needs are somehow too much. Here's the truth. Most fights aren't about dishes, schedules, or sex. They're about the unmet needs we're afraid to voice. Because what if we're told we're asking for too much? What if we're wrong for needing what we need? Today, we're talking about the healthy needs you deserve to have met in your relationship, and the unhealthy ones that might be quietly poisoning your connection. This isn't about blame. It's about clarity. There's a special kind of loneliness that only exists in the presence of someone who is supposed to make you feel the least alone. You could be sitting right next to him on the couch, close enough to touch, and yet feel miles away. It's not that he isn't hearing you. Technically, the words are entering his ears, but his attention is somewhere else entirely. Maybe he's scrolling through his phone, half listening as you share something that's been weighing on your heart. Or worse, you light up with excitement over something small but meaningful. A tiny victory at work, a memory that made you smile. And all you get in return is a distracted, absent-minded, "That's nice, babe," without even a glance in your direction. These moments don't just sting in the moment, they accumulate. Over time, they start to erode something sacred. The quiet, unshakable belief that you matter to him. Because when the person who loves you doesn't see you, not just your body in the room, but the thoughts in your mind, the feelings in your heart, it sends a message. Maybe not intentionally, but the message is there all the same. You are not important enough to be fully present for. Real love, the kind that nourishes instead of drains, doesn't just hear. It notices. It puts down the phone when you speak, not because you demanded it, but because what you're saying matters more than a screen. It asks follow-up questions, not out of obligation, but because it genuinely wants to understand your world. It remembers the little things, the way you take your coffee, the story you told about your childhood, the name of that coworker who always annoys you. Because those details aren't little to you. They're pieces of who you are. And when someone loves you, really loves you, they hold those pieces with care. So if you've ever found yourself hesitating before sharing something with him, or editing your excitement down to avoid feeling ignored, ask yourself, is this the way love should feel? Because you deserve more than being heard. You deserve to be seen. There's a myth that respect is something we only owe each other when things are easy, when we're on our best behavior, surrounded by others, or in moments of calm. But the truth is, respect matters most when tensions are high, when frustration boils over, when you're the only two people in the room and the rest of the world fades away. That's when you see what respect, or the lack of it, really looks like. It's in the way his voice changes when he's annoyed, the sharp edge of sarcasm that wasn't there before. It's the dismissive eye roll when you express hurt, the way he cuts you off mid-sentence because what he has to say feels more urgent than what you're feeling. And maybe worst of all, it's the phrase so many of us have heard in moments of vulnerability. You're overreacting. Those two words don't just dismiss your emotions, they send a quiet but unmistakable message. Your feelings are an inconvenience. Real respect isn't about never disagreeing. It's about how you disagree. It's possible to argue without contempt, to pause instead of interrupt, to challenge an idea without undermining the person saying it. Because in a healthy relationship, conflict isn't you versus me. It's us versus the problem. Even in anger, even when frustration runs hot, there's a baseline of care that doesn't disappear. The tone stays human. The words still hold kindness. And when the moment passes, neither of you is left with the sting of something that can't be unsaid. So pay attention to how it feels when you disagree. Do you walk away feeling heard, even if you didn't get your way? Or do you walk away feeling smaller, like your emotions were just another thing to be managed? Because love shouldn't make you swallow your voice to keep the peace. Respect isn't a bonus. It's the bare minimum. Let's be honest. No relationship exists without conflict. The idea that happy couples never fight is a fantasy that does more harm than good. The real question isn't whether you argue, but what happens when you do. Do you feel safe to express yourself, or have you learned to bite your tongue because speaking up has led to explosions in the past? That moment when you pause before sharing something difficult, that hesitation tells you everything. Are you holding back because you know how he'll react? Because you've been through this before and it never ends well. Healthy conflict doesn't mean no raised voices or hurt feelings. It means that even in the heat of an argument, there are unspoken rules. No name calling, no shutting down, no using your deepest insecurities as ammunition. It means that when things get too heated, you can take a breath and come back to it later. Because you both trust that the conversation isn't over, it's just on pause. Most importantly, it means you're not fighting to win. You're fighting to understand. Think about the last time you disagreed. Did it feel like you were on the same team, just working through a problem? Or did it feel like you were standing on opposite sides, each trying to prove the other wrong? The difference between those two experiences is the difference between conflict that breaks you down and conflict that builds something stronger. Because love isn't about never fighting. It's about fighting in a way that leaves you both feeling heard, even when you don't see eye to eye. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from receiving an apology that doesn't actually apologize. You know the kind, those hollow words that sound like regret but feel like dismissal. Sorry you feel that way isn't an apology. It's a subtle way of saying your feelings are the problem, not their actions. A real apology does three things. It names the hurt, takes ownership without excuses, and shows a commitment to change. Without these elements, "I'm sorry" becomes just another empty phrase that leaves the wound untouched while pretending to bandage it. What's worse is when you find yourself being the one who's always apologizing for having needs, for speaking up, for simply occupying space in the relationship. You apologize for your tone when you're upset, for wanting more than scraps of attention, for daring to express dissatisfaction. Meanwhile, the real hurts, the broken promises, the careless words, the repeated disappointments, go unacknowledged. This imbalance does something corrosive over time. It teaches you that your feelings are negotiable while his comfort is non-negotiable. Pay attention to the apologies you receive, or don't receive. Do they leave you feeling truly heard and valued, or do they feel like a way to simply move past the discomfort? Because an apology that doesn't acknowledge the specific hurt is just conflict resolution theater. And when you're always the one making amends for things that weren't your fault to begin with, ask yourself, when does my healing matter as much as his convenience? Real love doesn't make you beg for basic accountability. It looks you in the eye, names its mistakes, and does the work to rebuild what was broken. There comes a point in every relationship where you realize love isn't measured by grand gestures, but by the small daily choices that whisper, "You matter." It's in the way he puts down his phone when you start talking, not because you asked, but because he genuinely wants to listen. It's in the effortless way he makes time for you, not just when it's convenient, but when you need it most. These are the moments that tell you where you stand in his life. Not in his words, but in his actions. Yet so many women find themselves in the painful position of negotiating for the bare minimum of attention. You shouldn't have to schedule intimacy like a business meeting or beg for undistracted conversation like it's a special favor. When you're constantly competing with his phone, his hobbies, his work, when you're left rationing out crumbs of his time while he gives his best energy to everything else, that's not about being busy. That's about choices. Love shows up in what we prioritize, not just in what we promise. The hardest truth to face is that someone can be physically present while being emotionally absent. He might share your bed, but not your thoughts, your home, but not your heart. Real love doesn't make you question your place in his life. It doesn't leave you wondering if you're asking for too much when what you're really asking for is the bare minimum of connection. You deserve someone who chooses you, not out of obligation, but because nothing feels more important than being there, fully present in the life you're building together. At the end of the day, love isn't about finding time. It's about making time. It's about looking at all the demands of life and still saying, you come first. Because when someone truly values you, they don't make you compete for their attention. They give it freely, knowing that what you're building together is worth every moment. There's an unspoken weight that builds slowly in relationships where emotional labor isn't shared. The kind of exhaustion that comes from being the one who always remembers birthdays, initiates difficult conversations, plans date nights, and carries the mental load of keeping your connection alive. At first, it might feel natural, even loving, to be the one who gives more. But over time, that imbalance starts to wear thin, leaving you wondering, if I stop pouring into this relationship, would it dry up completely? Emotional reciprocity isn't about keeping score, but about mutual investment. It's the difference between being in a partnership and playing a role where you're cast as the giver, the planner, the emotional caretaker by default. Notice the small things. Who reaches out first after an argument? Who checks in when life gets stressful? Who remembers the details that matter? These aren't just random acts. They're the pulse of your relationship, the quiet proof that you're both showing up for each other. When that balance is off, resentment creeps in, not because you're keeping tally, but because love shouldn't feel like a solo performance. You shouldn't have to carry the entire emotional weight of your connection while he enjoys the comfort of your effort. Real partnership means both people bring their full selves, not just their presence, but their attention, their care, their willingness to nurture what you're building together. It means your emotional needs aren't treated as afterthoughts, but as priorities equal to his own. Because love isn't sustainable when only one person is doing the heavy lifting. At its best, love is a dance where sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, but you're always moving together. Not one person dragging the other along. There's a fine line between caring and controlling that often gets blurred in relationships, especially when past hurts make us afraid of being vulnerable again. That urge to monitor his texts, question his friendships, or dictate how he spends his time doesn't come from love. It springs from fear's desperate need for safety. We convince ourselves that if we can just manage every variable, we'll prevent the pain we're terrified of facing. But this illusion of control comes at a steep cost. Every demand we make in the name of protecting the relationship actually erodes the very foundation it stands on: trust. True intimacy requires breathing room. It flourishes when two people choose each other freely, not when one feels policed or suffocated. The healthiest relationships understand the difference between boundaries, which protect your well-being, and rules, which attempt to manage someone else's behavior. A boundary says, I won't stay in a relationship with dishonesty. A rule says, you can't talk to that person. One preserves your self-respect while allowing him autonomy. The other breeds resentment and secrecy. The paradox is that the tighter we try to grip love, the more it slips through our fingers. Control doesn't prevent betrayal. It just creates relationships where people hide things better. Real security comes from cultivating a connection strong enough that both people want to be there, not because they're forced, but because they genuinely choose to be. This doesn't mean ignoring red flags or abandoning self-protection. It means recognizing that love can't be demanded or monitored into existence. It must be freely given, day after day, by two people who trust each other enough to let go. There comes a point in some relationships where love feels less like a safe harbor and more like an ongoing test, one you didn't mean to create but can't seem to stop administering. You might catch yourself pulling away just to see if he'll reach out or withholding affection to measure his reaction. Maybe you manufacture small conflicts to gauge his patience, or drop hints instead of speaking needs directly, secretly hoping he'll prove his care by deciphering them. It won't make you feel like you're asking for too much when what you're really asking for is the bare minimum of emotional safety and presence. Perhaps this is your turning point, the season where you gather the courage to have those difficult conversations, to set those boundaries you've been avoiding, to finally stop settling for breadcrumbs when you deserve the whole meal. Or perhaps it's the season where you face the harder truth, that some needs will never be met in this relationship, no matter how perfectly you word them or how patiently you wait. Both realizations require bravery. Both paths lead to growth. Whatever you choose, remember this: Your heart isn't meant to live in hiding. It's meant to take up space, to want deeply, to need openly, to love without constantly second-guessing whether you're worthy of receiving it in return. There is a version of love that won't make you feel like you're too much or not enough. A love that meets you where you are, not where you've shrunk yourself to be. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to prove you deserve it. You only have to believe, really believe, that it exists and that you're worthy of nothing less. If today's words found their way to that tender place in your heart where doubts and hopes mingle, know this: you're not alone in this journey. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, or leave a comment below about which truth resonated most with you. This is Marriage Matters, where we don't just talk about love, we reclaim it, one honest conversation at a time. Until next time, remember, the love that's meant for you won't ask you to abandon yourself to keep it. Double asterisk.